And we are live, remarkably. It's Mark Edwards and Kate Connolly have joined me today. I normally get a cup of tea at this point and make everybody jealous, but I completely forgot to do it. It's been one of those terrible days when everything's been going a bit wrong. But we are here, and I'm grateful to see you. Mark is an author of very many books, and Katie's also got in touch with me. Well, somebody I think joined us up this afternoon. A couple of days ago, because I was asking about book groups. So I'm trying to work out what is changing about our reading, because we're not getting to libraries, we're not getting to bookshops, we're having to read in other ways. We're stuck at home quite a lot. And so I sort of was thinking, well, people surely must be setting up virtual book clubs. And somebody said, oh, well, Katie is up in the East Riding of Yorkshire. Where am I speaking to you, Katie?
Yes, I'm in a little village called Bransburton in the East Riding of Yorkshire.
Right. And how is that as a place to be on lockdown?
It's actually lovely. It's really, really nice. We've got loads of open spaces where we can go out for a walk and not really come across anybody. It's all everybody's having a really nice chat from the other side of the road when we do see people. So it's actually very sort of quaint country life.
Where are you, Mark?
I'm in Wolverhampton, so I'm in the urban sprawl, but actually I live right on the outskirts. Right. So we have got quite a lot of countryside around us and canals. Right. So we take our dog kind of along the canal paths and around the fields. Yesterday, for example, I had a long conversation with somebody from one side of the canal to the other, which felt like quite a decent distance to to communicate with somebody. Safe distance, yeah. While my dog swam in the canal between us.
Yeah, it's strange times. Mark's author of, I was trying to count up how many books. I think 12 solo books. Is that right? Am I right there?
Oh my God, I don't know. It's 10 solo books and 6 co-written with Louise Voss.
Which is a lot of books. And it's been interesting. Yeah. And I want to talk about the trajectory of that career before we talk a bit about Here to Stay, which is your current one that's out in digital and paperback at the moment.
Yeah.
But you started in conventional publishing, writing crime fiction. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, actually, so I spent many years trying to get a publisher. I managed to get an agent, and then I couldn't get a publisher. And so after years of trying, Louise and I then self-published a couple of books, and they did really well. That led to a deal with HarperCollins, a 4-book deal, which didn't go particularly brilliantly. And so I then self-published again. A book called The Magpies, and that led to a deal with Thomas and Mercer, who are one of Amazon Publishing's imprints, their crime and thriller imprint. That was in 2013, and I've been with them ever since. So 7 years now since it's actually exactly 7 years since The Magpies came out, because it was Easter 2013.
And you were sort of publishing into a very new space in that with Thomas and Mercer. I mean, really nobody did. I don't think got the idea that people really knew what it was at that stage, that what books were going to become when they were published in that digital format.
No, I think me and Mel Sherratt were the first 2 authors to get signed by them in the UK.
Right.
They'd been doing it for a while in the US. So yeah, most of my book sales have been digital.
Right.
Actually audio is quite a big chunk. And then paper, and they're all available as paperbacks, and Here to Stay was a hardback as well, actually. But yeah, most of my readers are using Kindles.
Yeah.
And so I've done a bit of everything over the last 7 or 8 years. So yeah, I've seen it all.
There's one of your readers coming saying, Mark, it doesn't seem that long since The Magpies.
Hi, Alison. Yeah, I know. Well, it doesn't seem that long to me either. But I mean, all of those books, those 16 books, they've all been since 2011. So at some points there have been 2 a year.
That's brilliant. I'm just learning to do 2 books a year now myself, and it's interesting. I mean, it's quite doable. I mean, actually, books take as long as you need to write them in, don't they? Really?
Yeah.
I want to say hello to a few people who come up who've been really regulars. Andy, Magda, Sven, hello all. Thanks for coming back. But your current book, Here to Stay, which is I think probably one of your best sellers at this stage, isn't it? I mean, it's really been selling hugely over the last thing, which is a really, I mean, it's you have been writing kind of domestic noir fiction, but a kind of twist and a kind of humour to it. And this is the uninvited house guest. Well, not uninvited; they are invited house guests, but it's that idea of people worming their way into your precious space, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's about the in-laws from hell. So this guy who lives on his own with his cat in this lovely house in South London that he's refurbished, meets a woman, has a whirlwind romance. They get married and she moves in, and the day that they get back from their honeymoon, she asks if her parents can come and stay for a couple of weeks because they've been living in France and they're moving back to the UK, and they move in and all hell breaks loose. So it's kind of like a very dark version of Meet the Parents or Meet the Fockers, whatever it was called. But when I initially conceived the book, it was going to be my character going to live with his in-laws. But then I thought, actually, it's much more powerful if the kind of interlopers, the barbarians, come into your castle. It's about that kind of an Englishman's home is his castle, and it gets invaded by these malignant forces who basically do everything they can to destroy his life.
Did you enjoy writing those malignant forces? Was it fun?
Did I? Oh yeah, it's great. It's great fun. Yeah, it's great fun. And this book does get very dark. And yeah, it's obviously, with writing all books, there are times when you're kind of rolling about on the floor, thrashing around in pain and banging your head against the walls with frustration, trying to figure out the plot. But it was fun. And I do kind of laugh to myself as I'm sitting there writing all these terrible things happening to people. So yeah, it's the darker and the more twisted, the better.
Because I mean, one of the things that really comes out from these sort of things is you really enjoy also making it's the reader begins to feel really uncomfortable. You put that by putting your characters in a really you enjoy that thing of just thinking, oh god, this can't happen, and that incredible thing you don't really want to be there, but you carry on reading on to hope that something's going to come through it, which is a really great way of building tension, but it's a real strength, and it's hard to do.
Yeah, I think that my kind of mission statement, if you like, is books in which scary things happen to ordinary people, and I always have very kind of regular characters who people can identify with, and my male protagonists are not like Jack Reacher style action heroes who kind of go around punching people and toting guns and overpowering the baddies with their brute strength. They're a bit like me and you, really. They're a little bit wimpy. Not that I'm saying you're wimpy.
I take umbrage, but it's true.
But no, they're like kind of regular people, and some readers don't. Some readers actually say to me, "Oh, that character was so wet. Why didn't he just kick them out or do this or do that?" Like they kind of. But I think in real life, in situations where you find yourself trapped in this very difficult situation, you don't know what to do. You feel kind of paralyzed, and the police won't help him, and the law doesn't help him, so he doesn't know what to do. And yeah, what I wanted to do with this book really was I wanted to create these characters that readers would absolutely loathe, and you would be kind of screaming and swearing at the book because you hate them so much. And I think that's what I did achieve with these in-laws. Yeah, I wanted to make people really angry when they were reading it, and really frustrated on behalf of the of the poor guy who's having to go through it.
Yeah. Katy, what kind of stuff do you tend to read? You're a librarian. Presumably your tastes are fairly sort of wide-ranging then.
Yes. To be honest, I would always come back to sort of crime fiction and thrillers and things like that. But I love getting recommendations from the other librarians. We sometimes, when we have our monthly meetings, we just suggest what we've been reading, and everybody kind of does a bit of a book swap. And then you end up reading something completely different, and it really just broadens your horizons. But I do always tend to come back to that sort of crime thriller. You know, if I really want to switch off and get lost in another world, that's the type of thing that I'd like to read.
Now, it must be very, very, very weird to be a librarian right now, because like the beginning of last week, everybody closed their doors, basically.
Yeah.
I've lost any sense of time, actually, but it feels like about a month ago. But it was about...
Yeah,
it's only a week and a half ago.
Yeah, it's really strange.
Yeah. So what did... I mean, presumably you all got an email or something saying this is it, we've got to close.
Yes, well, we've been toying with the idea for a few days beforehand, but we wanted to... the East Riding of Yorkshire particularly has got a higher demographic of older people. So the libraries are a real lifeline in the community. So we wanted to keep them open as long as we could. However, it was really becoming quite problematic about how we make it safe for people to come in. But we were very conscious of the fact that they're community hubs, and we get such a lot of vulnerable people in there as well, that it's another way of keeping in touch with the community. But it got to the point where we had to close down. So what we've done in the East Riding of Yorkshire, they've actually set up some community hubs, not in libraries, unfortunately, but it got us to a point where we said we have to think about how we can give people some of the facilities without having the building open. So this is where the online book club really presented an opportunity for us. So that's what we've been trying to highlight.
So online book club, sorry, explain how that works and what it is. How do people find it for a start? Well,
we have our ebook provider is called BorrowBox, which is our library authorities one. But I know that they do offer ebooks for quite a lot of library authorities across the country. So I would recommend anybody just joining their local library and seeing where their ebook provision comes from. Normally, when people download an ebook, we're allowed to issue it one at a time to people. But BorrowBox do these things called campaign titles, where 500 people can download the same book, but for a limited amount of time. So this is where our online book club idea came from. So we would buy a certain amount of titles that can then be downloaded simultaneously 500 times at once, which means that a lot of people can be reading the same book and have a conversation about it afterwards.
Right.
So yeah, we started off with a Matt Haig book, and that did really, really well, and people really enjoyed it. And then we've added more and more titles on and kind of varied the styles of the books, and had some really great feedback. So yeah, and since obviously the libraries have closed down, we've pumped a bit more money into this because everybody, can only access the library using the ebooks.
Can I just interrupt? Can you two talk amongst each other? The front doorbell has gone, and I think I'm the only person who can reach it.
Yeah, of course. So where do you host the conversations? Is it on Facebook or?
Yeah, we've got a Facebook group within our library page called the Faith in the Book Club. And so we'll just kind of post up the titles that are available and just ask people what they thought about them.
He's good.
Okay. And what book are you doing at the moment?
We've got quite a few, actually. We've got one called The Madonna of Bolton, which is a brilliant sort of coming of age story about a boy kind of growing up and realizing that he's actually gay, and going through his emotions and how he sort of came to understand his life and the people around him. And I found it really, really interesting to read, especially having children myself. It made me a lot more aware of how to support somebody if
is it a memoir or a novel?
It's classed as a novel, but you feel like there's quite a lot of experience drawn from. And then a couple of new titles. We've just got the Big Little Lies as an audio, which I'm part way through listening to at the moment, but it's quite thrilling. I haven't watched the TV series. I like to read the books first.
The TV series is great.
Oh, is it?
The TV series is brilliant. Yeah.
Looking
I don't
forward
know here at all, do I? This is fantastic.
And then we've just got a lovely one called is it the Lost Flowers of Alice Hart?
Okay.
And that's Holly Ringland, I think, is the author. And that's a really lovely story about a little girl kind of told through flowers. There's another couple. There is Matt Haig, Notes on a Nervous Planet, which we thought was very apt for this time when people are dealing with higher levels of anxiety. And I think that's it for the moment. And we've got a children's book we've just put on there as well.
Okay.
A Garth Nix one, Have Sword, Will Travel. So my daughter just downloaded that.
I've got a question from Magdalena Kowalski, who I happen to know is a librarian as well, who works in Cambridgeshire. It says, Katy, how many people on average join the book club sessions?
Well, I think the highest number of downloads we got for the Madonna of Bolton, we've got about 100 people that downloaded the book. And then I think we've got a conversation going with maybe about 20 people with a post in the Facebook group.
Right. Oh, that's brilliant.
It's really just, it's just gathering strength at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think it's really interesting what happened at the moment, because there's been a lot sort of, can you hear all right? I've got some shopping being unloaded in the kitchen because it's very real. This is very real, this but some excuses being given my way there. But ebooks like most people, I don't think even knew you could get ebooks from libraries. They're used to them being this thing. They haven't even looked at that. But actually, BorrowBox does seem to be in lots of places, and I've played with it myself. I only found out myself because I'm a volunteer, actually, thanks to Magda. And it's great. I mean, sadly, not many marks there because there's still that differential between Kindle ebooks and other ones, isn't there? But I think that should be changing at some point in the future.
Yeah, I think maybe my HarperCollins books might be available through it, but the more recent books, because they're published by Amazon, I think they're exclusive to Kindle, so you can't get them through BorrowBox.
Right.
You can get the paperbacks in libraries, which is great. So because a lot of people don't realise that every time somebody borrows a book from a library, the author gets a small payment of about 7 pence. So I don't know how it works with the ebooks, but every year we get a check. Not a check. That sounds very old-fashioned, doesn't it? We get a deposit in our bank accounts from it's called PLR, which is it was always a nice little bonus to get at the end of the year, and you can see how many people have borrowed your books.
That's lovely, isn't it? Seeing those statistics, it is just quite nice. It's quite disconnected a lot of the time, unless you go to the libraries yourself and see the books in there. And so it's lovely to see things. But what I was thinking is about, it's early days with your book club, presumably. But do you think something of it will survive into when lockdown finally finishes and we're allowed back into the wild? Do you think there's elements of this will come over into how you operate libraries now?
I would think so, yeah. I think people are realising the benefits of reading. Because it's obviously a proven stress reliever, and I think people have found themselves with a lot of time on their hands, unless they have children in the house. But I think people are kind of rediscovering reading, and then not being able to get to a library, they've still got access to getting these books, and I think people will kind of fall in love with reading again. It's just slowing things down a little bit, isn't it? And I think once the libraries reopen and people can go back in there, it's going to be somewhere that people will go to because they can.
We were just having a quick chat about this, apart from the fact that Mark has children in the house, so he's used to being able to work in perfect isolation. So whereas it's been great for me, this, I think for writers like Mark, it's slightly more trying. But I think we are sort of changing it. Like the first few days, my household was watching a lot of television. After a while, television begins to sort of lose its edge, and you begin to find you need other stuff, I think, anyway. How are you finding it in your house, Mark?
Well, I've got 2 boys aged 6 and 8, and we are homes. My wife works from home anyway, so she's been kind of doing the bulk of the homeschooling, while I've been up here in my office writing. So I've got a deadline. I've got to try and get this book finished, but it's very, very distracting. But yeah, it's the Easter holidays start now, so we're going to kind of let them be a bit more free. And I think I've basically just spend 60 quid on a video game for them that'll keep them occupied for a while. But I've been doing Lego to relax.
Okay.
I've really got back into Lego. In fact, I was never really into Lego when I was a kid, but as an adult, I've discovered it's kind of really good for like mindfulness. I find it really relaxing to sit and just follow the instructions and put these huge elaborate things together, and that's much more relaxing than watching TV.
What's the best you've built so far then?
I've got the Stranger Things Lego, the upside down, which is amazing, and I'm doing a tree house at the moment, which is massive. I've got they're the big kind of like aimed at 16 plus. They're aimed at grown-ups, and they're bloody expensive, but they are really good. And I've been reading as well. I'm actually reading a book called Notes from the Apocalypse at the moment.
Very good.
Which is it's a non-fiction book about this guy who went around and interviewed all these preppers and people who have these luxury bunkers in South Dakota and New Zealand. And so he must have researched this book a couple of years ago. And he's basically going around interviewing people who think that it's the end of the world and how they're preparing for it. It's really, really interesting. It's kind of like a John Ronson, Louis Theroux kind of book, interviewing very interesting Americans. So I recommend that. Are
you getting any time to read right now, Katy?
I'm doing a lot of listening to audiobooks because like Mark, I've got two, mine are 5 and 8. So we are juggling the homeschooling as well, but there's not an awful lot of that going on, in fairness. We just try and do a bit of times tables, read a book. But my daughter's getting really into the e-audiobooks, which I feel to me, it feels a bit better than the TV because they're still using their imaginations a little bit.
Well, I think you use your brain in a different way for each of those things, don't you? I think it's quite, I mean, it's definitely, people are saying that audiobooks and ebooks are going to come out very well out of this sort of audiobooks.
Because I think when I do my daily walk with the dog, I listen to audiobooks as well.
Right.
So I just started listening to 3 Hours by Rosamund Lupton.
Right.
Have you read that?
Oh, I haven't, no.
It's about a school shooting. I'm listening to all this really dark stuff. It's good. It's very good.
I think it's quite helpful sometimes. I mean, people either seem to go away and retreat into kind of P.G. Wodehouse land, or actually want to read quite dark stuff themselves to help them explore this stuff.
Well, I started reading about 2 weeks ago a book called Fever by I can't remember his name. He's a South African crime writer. And
I can't remember
Dion something. I got to about page 20 or 30 and it revealed that this virus that had wiped out 99% of humanity was a coronavirus. And I was like, actually, I think I'm going to have to stop reading this. And it was like, oh, this person got it from a bat. And then he got on a plane, or he gave it to somebody who got on a plane and went to a conference in Europe. And then I was like, oh my God, this is so close to home. It's really, luckily. But I mean, it has a 100% fatality rate, though, the virus in the book. So it's quite a lot worse than the real
odds are better in reality.
Yes.
Mark, I want to ask you about The House Guest, which is coming out in the summer.
June the 3rd, yes.
And so what? Tell me a bit about that. But where did that start from?
Well, it's set in New York, and I had an idea. I wanted to write a book set in the States for a while. I quite often set books where people go on holiday or go on trips or go away, and then stuff happens to them when they're on these vacations. And I just had this idea of this couple who are house sitting in New York, and a stranger turns up on the doorstep saying that she's she's a friend of the owners who are away and are not contactable because they're at one of these like silent retreats out in the desert. And they let her come and stay. And once again, all hell breaks loose. Creepy stuff ensues. It sounds like it might be a similar kind of setup to the previous book, Here to Stay, but actually it goes off in a very, very different direction.
Right.
So it's more of a kind of Harlan Coben, Linwood Barclay style thriller than strictly a domestic noir. And I went to stay in Brooklyn with my family, and we stayed in an Airbnb in Williamsburg, which is like one of the hipster capitals of the world, in fact. Sorry?
I'd expect no less of you than
Oh, it's such an amazing place.
Right.
And the Airbnb we stayed in was owned by an old record producer, and it had like a working jukebox in the living room, and it's, I mean, God, it must be worth a fortune, this house, because it's right next to the subway.
Right.
And so I've set the book in this house, and it was, well, you know what New York's like in the summer. It's like so hot and so humid. Dragged my poor children, who were 2 years younger then than they are now, around the city in the sweltering, sweaty heat for a week, researching the book. But yeah, it was great. It was really refreshing, actually, setting a book somewhere else, because all of my other books have been set in the UK.
Right.
And actually, the one I'm writing another one now, which is also set in the US, in Maine, in a cabin in the woods.
Right.
So,
That's quite, I mean, presumably your American audience is quite huge, because if you're published by Amazon, you're kind of, there's a kind of globalism.
Yeah, well, it's a bit patchy over there, actually. Two of the books, Follow Your Home and Here to Stay, have done really well in the US. Follow Your Home is my biggest seller. And that one was partly set in Romania. And I wondered whether some Americans are resistant to reading books set in the UK. But then there are lots of massive hits in America that are set in the UK. So that's like The Girl on the Train, for example, was huge over there. And Ruth Ware's books are all really big, and there are some British authors who are popular, but it's much harder to sell books in the US than it is in the UK.
It's a funny old territory. I mean, the first time me and Mark ever hung out together was actually at this big American book
in New Orleans.
Lovely time.
Yeah.
And I actually interviewed Mark then to do a little thing, and I think he just about passed the 500,000 mark at this stage in terms of book sales. And I was saying, 500,000, doesn't that seem loads? And he's saying, well, no, I want to sell 1 million, actually. Well, you've sold at least 3 million now, presumably.
Oh wow.
Yeah. 3 million, yes. I think it might have been 1 million at that point.
Oh, was it? Oh, I'm sorry.
I was probably like, I want to sell 2 or 10. I don't know, but yeah, I'm never satisfied.
Well, that's good. It's good.
But no, it's great. I mean, it's great because, I mean, I literally spent 15 years trying to get a book published, like pouring tens of thousands of hours into writing and giving up all of my weekends and all of my spare time, and doing that whole thing of submitting to agents and publishers and getting close and never quite happening. And then I gave up for a while when I started having children. I just thought, I can't do it anymore. It's too painful. And then, so now to be in the situation where I am now, where I'm making a living from it and supporting my family doing it, is just unreal.
No, it's fantastic. Yeah. It happens to very few people, but you have worked incredibly hard at it, and also you write fantastic books, which kind of helps.
Well,
we've got a question from Pippa here. Has Mark had some awful house guests in the past? And how are your in-laws taking? How did they take the house guest?
Oh, well, the in-laws thing, that was funny because I told that's, I mean, that's the question that everyone says. It's like, are they based on your real in-laws? And they're not. But they are. The situation is actually based on something that happened within my extended family,
Right.
where I can't really say who it is, but somebody I know got married and moved his wife in with his parents, and then they made her life such a misery that basically they got divorced within 2 months.
Oh no.
And so that I was kind of thinking, God, what could have gone on in that house that must have been so bad that basically, so the parents and the sister all kind of ganged up on the new wife and just drove her out. And so that was the initial, like I said, that was the initial idea where I was going to have my character going to stay with the in-laws.
Nightmare.
So, but my in-laws are actually lovely, and my mother-in-law in particular is really, really supportive and is one of the first people who reads all my books, and she loves the fact that I've written a book about a mother-in-law from hell.
What about me?
But no, I've never really had any terrible house guests. No, I need to make something up, don't I, to make it more interesting?
Right. Fraction of write what you know, I think, kind of misses the point. Sometimes write what you can make up. But anyway.
Exactly, yeah. What can you imagine? We can all imagine having somebody really outstays their welcome. And the thing that kind of made the book Here to Stay, this is that makes it real, is that I talked to a solicitor who told me that if you did invite someone to come and stay in your house and you didn't have like a written contract or anything and they weren't paying you rent, then it is almost impossible to get rid of them. You'd have to go through the courts. The police wouldn't do anything. And it could take up to a year easily, over a year, to get them out, having gone through various stages. And they could use all sorts of delaying tactics to prevent you.
I've got my niece. I've got my niece. Listen, I should wrap it up there because I try and keep them to half an hour. I've just had Sven saying if you should have to enlarge the time. Sven's from Germany. He says these conversations are so interesting they can be longer, but I also have to get on with my life, and I think half an hour of us is generally enough. But before we go, I want to, Katy, if people want to, two things. Are you going to have any? Do you think more plans are coming round from libraries about how you keep virtually open? And secondly, how do people find? Is there a URL or somewhere?
Yeah, well, anybody local to our area can find us at eastridinglibraries.co.uk. But I would say have a look at your local library provider and see who their ebook provider is. It may be BorrowBox, it may be another provider, but I'm sure you'll be able to get ebooks through your library and e-audiobooks. Sorry, what was the other question?
The other question, I was just wondering if this is inspiring any other ideas, because I think one of the things that has been really interesting, and it's really interesting in the publishing and book sales interesting areas, they're having to think really hard about how we do this now. Do you know what I mean? And everybody thinks the book trade is very old and fusty, and maybe it is in some ways, but actually I'm hearing a lot of great ideas about how we carry on doing books and getting people reading. And I was just wondering if do you think libraries are going to carry on thinking in this kind of way?
Absolutely. I think, well, certainly for us, straight away, our senior managers just said, whatever's left in the budget, pump it all into ebooks and e-audiobooks, because it's still providing a service for our residents. And that was the key thing. And then I think for us as well, it's about how we build those online communities as well, to still give that sense of community, because I think that's the really big thing about libraries, that they are one of the only sort of safe community hubs that we still have these in this sort of digital age. So it's making that kind of virtual community hub available to people as a safe space for people to enjoy.
That's really brilliant. I'm going to call it a day. Please come back, Mark, if we're still all inside when Here to Stay is being published, and we can do do some launch events. Hopefully we'll be out. But thank you so much for spending my tea time here with you in Wolverhampton and somewhere in the East Riding of York.
Thank you very much.
All the best there anyway.
Cheers.
I've got to stop streaming now.
Okay, thank